C-SPAN throughout April, every morning at 6:50 a.m., with an interview during the Washington Journal at 9:30 a.m.
Washington Journal continues.
On your screen now is Dalia Mogahed. She is the co-author, along with John Esposito, of this book study put out by Gallup, Who Speaks for Islam? What a Billion Muslims Really Think. Ms. Mogahed, tell us about how you went about conducting your research for this book.
Well, Peter, what we did was we went into more than 35 majority Muslim countries or countries with a significant Muslim population and asked a representative sample of 1,000 people in each country. That sample represents 1 billion people.
How long did that take? So you talked about 35,000 people?
Well, actually, over 6 years, we talked to more than 50,000 people. And we started right after 9/11. The story is actually kind of interesting. Donald Rumsfeld was asked in a press conference, well, what do Muslims think about all this right after the horrific acts of 9/11? And his response was, I don't know. It's not like you can take a Gallup poll. Well, we decided to do just that.
And you've put it in a book. What is the biggest is there a consistency among all these countries and among the Muslims from these different countries, a consistent misunderstanding about the West or the U.S. that you found?
Peter, that's a really good question. I think the biggest misunderstanding is the assumption among many Muslims that the West simply doesn't care about them, that they don't care about better relations, which is simply not true. We've asked Americans as well as Europeans their personal concern, and they are very concerned for better relations. What's interesting, though, is that in the West, the same exact misconception exists. They also believe that Muslims don't care about better relations, and when we ask them, they care as well.
A lot of press about how the U.S. image has really fallen since 9/11 in the Muslim world. Did you discover why?
Well, yes, we asked several questions about that and have done a great deal of analysis. First, what we found is that people in majority Muslim countries do not see the West as monolithic. So Europe, France and Germany enjoy neutral to positive regard. However, like you said, the United States has suffered. And what has really been at the heart of that are essentially three things. One is the perception that we as Americans don't regard Muslims as equals. So this idea of cultural disrespect. Second is the perception of political domination of their own countries, and then the issue of acute conflicts such as Iraq and Afghanistan.
Where does Israel fall?
It is at the heart of the issue, especially in the Middle East, but it is not something that all Muslims around the world are talking about top of mind. However, when you ask Arabs in the Middle East what's the most important thing that the West can do, they talk about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
One of the other issues, and we're going to put the phone numbers up, we're talking about this worldwide poll of Muslims done by the Gallup organization, and that's what we're talking about. Got the numbers up, divided by political affiliation. We also have our fourth line open for Muslims, 202-628-0184. Of course, you can call on the other lines, but we wanted to make sure that we heard some Muslim voices this morning also. One of the things that we've learned about here in America, a lot of us have learned about since 9/11, is Sharia. And there are some countries in your survey that say that they would like to have Sharia be the way that laws should be, you know, the basis for laws. Right. Is that a consistent theme among all the countries, the Muslim countries that you surveyed?
Peter, there's a great deal of diversity among Muslims around the world, of course. They're spread over 57 different countries, and our survey was very diverse. What we did find is that there was a consistent theme around wanting Sharia as a source of legislation. In some cases, people wanted it as the only source of legislation. But we do have to take a step back and begin to understand what people actually mean when they say Sharia. So while saying they wanted Sharia as a source of legislation, people were also saying they wanted democratic values such as freedom of speech and freedom of religion. So the interpretation of Sharia is more around religious principles rather than religious law.
How long have you lived in the United States?
I've lived here my whole life since I was very young.
And you were born in Cairo, you
Cairo,
said?
yes.
And where'd you go to school?
I went to school in Madison, Wisconsin.
So, do you consider yourself an American? I mean,
absolutely.
Muslim American. How is it, when you went overseas to do these, how were you perceived?
Well, you know, there were also obviously a great deal of diversity in the way people regard Muslim Americans. But once people realize that we in America have the freedom to practice our faith, that's really the first question, and that's what people wonder most about. Interestingly, we had a delegation come to Gallup a few weeks ago from China, Muslim Chinese professionals and scholars, and their biggest concern about Muslim Americans was our freedom to practice our faith, and this is coming from a group that has also, you know, really struggled with that.
So is that something, when you would travel overseas, would people be surprised that you were free to practice your faith here in the US?
In many ways, yes. That was their first question, and we're often surprised when I would say that yes, we have the freedom to attend our religious services and practice our faith freely, much more freely, in fact, than many people in other parts of the world.
What other misconceptions about the U.S. were out there?
Well, I think one of the biggest misconceptions is really this idea of an apathetic American, that Americans just don't care about the rest of the world, and especially don't care about better relations with Muslims, and this concept could not be more wrong.
First call up for Dalia Mogahed is from Orlando, Florida. Go ahead, Orlando, Democrat. Orlando, you with us? Whoop. Always helps if I punch the button.
Hello.
Hi, Orlando.
Yes, good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Please go ahead.
Okay. Yes, you mentioned the fact that you're free to practice your religion here in this country, and I think that is such an important issue. That's the reason people came to this country originally, to escape religious persecution, you know, in Europe. And my question is regarding religious liberty. I think it's a really critical issue, and I think it's something that we as Americans don't really understand. Specifically, for example, there was a case in Afghanistan about 1.5 years ago where a young man decided to convert to Christianity, and it was flabbergasting to realize that the Constitution, apparently, the new Constitution in Afghanistan, made this person subject to being executed. And the fact of the matter was he was allowed to leave the country, but only on the condition that he was declared mentally unstable. And these are the kind of things that we as Americans cannot comprehend. And I'm wondering if you can make a comment about if you think there's a possibility that religious liberty that people enjoy here in this country, your religion and all religions, if that can become some kind of a universal doctrine that we can all adhere to.
Dalia Mogahed.
I think the caller was talking about the concept of religious liberty. And we did ask questions around that. We gave people the scenario of a theoretical constitution that they would be drafting for a new country, and asked them if they would include such laws as, or such guarantees as the freedom of religion, freedom of speech, and freedom of assembly, and found that majorities around the world said that if it were up to them, that they would include such stipulations. So as far as public opinion, which is what I can authoritatively speak on, this is a value that people do adhere to.
So when President Bush talks about, has often said that they hate our freedoms, how do you interpret that statement, and how do you interpret that in light of this survey?
Well, what's so ironic is the one thing they admire the most, in fact, about the West is our freedoms. We ask people what is their favorite thing about the West, what do they admire the most, and the two most frequent responses was Western technology and Western liberty. What was so interesting is when we asked Americans the same question, they gave the same two top responses.
There's a paragraph in here I'd like to read and then have you respond to. It's talking about the Pope's speech in Germany that he gave a while back, and also the Mohammed cartoons that appeared in some Western publications. Understanding Muslim public opinion can be a key to preempting or preventing conflict in today's world, making it easier to anticipate and to avoid unnecessary conflicts. If we place Benedict's speech at Regensburg, as well as the Danish cartoons, within the context of Muslim responses in the Gallup World Poll data, Muslim reactions are predictable and the conflicts avoidable. How do you avoid those conflicts? By not printing the cartoons, not speaking, not having the Pope speak what he wanted to talk about, or?
I think it's not really about censorship, but it's about understanding the context within where these statements were sort of thrown into. What we have to do is take a step back and look at the situation holistically. What these statements were from the point of view of many Muslims around the world were essentially a type of racial slur. It was like the N-word. And the reason that the N-word coming from, the reason African Americans are so offended by racial slurs is because they exist within a power structure or a power relationship that they have felt has been very oppressive. The same exists in the Muslim world. They believe that there is this asymmetry of power and an oppression by many Western powers, and so these statements are sort of being thrown in as a trigger to a much wider fuel and a perception of being dominated and degraded.
Next call for Dalia Mogahed comes from Boston. Good morning. It will really help if I punch the lines. I apologize. Boston, you're on the air.
Good morning.
Please go ahead
Hello?
with your comments, sir.
Yeah, my comment is just about just calling or just to say I really appreciate seeing this kind of program of talking about Islam and making people know what Islam is, and just so, because me, I'm happy that I'm a Muslim, and again, just to let people know what Islam is all about, that Islam is a religion of peace, that we don't like nothing like a violence in the religion, and just happy of seeing this kind of program to be in the air for people just to know what Islam is all about. That is all my comment is all about.
Caller, where are you from originally?
I'm from Africa.
Thank you for calling in. You have a chapter here too on a religion of peace, but you also have a chapter on, you talk about jihad in the book. What do you write about jihad?
Well, we wanted to explore what people thought jihad actually meant. So why not just ask people that question? In fact, we did. And what we found was people thought it meant an internal struggle to battle one's own demons, one's own bad habits, a struggle to be good. And also other people talked about jihad as a noble and restrained military struggle. So there are two meanings. One is a struggle of the sword and a struggle of the soul. But whether people believe it's a struggle, for a military struggle or an internal struggle, in both cases it is considered a noble, just struggle, and not one where civilians are attacked, because this is specifically prohibited in the Sharia.
When you surveyed Americans, did they see Islam as a religion of peace, as that caller just mentioned?
The majority do not. Many believe that Islam is a religion they just simply don't understand. So we asked Americans to talk about how much they knew about Muslims and their beliefs and values, and the majority, 57%, said that they simply knew nothing or not much. We also found that a large portion of Americans admit to having at least some prejudice against Muslims. So there is this lack of knowledge, and part of what this book will do is help people make decisions based on facts and not fear.
And in fact, you write that 44% of Americans say Muslims are too extreme in their religious beliefs, less than half believe that U.S. Muslims are loyal to the U.S. Was that surprising to you?
It was surprising because I think loyalty to this country is the most basic requirement of citizenship, and for the majority of Americans to not believe that their fellow Muslim citizens are loyal is quite surprising.
Is that feeling reciprocated in the Muslim world toward the U.S.? 44% of Muslims say Americans are too extreme, or they don't want an American as a neighbor, etc.
Well, we actually didn't ask those specific questions. What we did ask is about the U.S. government more than the American people. And people do have these ideas about our government as, in some cases, being religiously extreme. Ironically, the two countries that said that associated religious extremism with our government were Saudi Arabia and Egypt. That felt like that some of the motivation behind the war on terror was religious extremism. They also associated things like technologically advanced with the United States. So it wasn't all negative, but there is this perception of a government that is easily provoked and hostile.
Next call comes from Savannah, Georgia, Democrat. You're on the air.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir. I thank you for C-SPAN. I'd like to direct your attention to one certain word. It's a biblical word, and according to my ancient holy Bibles, the word is eunuch, and it's beings of various kinds, a group of persons having any type of sexual issue, not to exclude the castrated male, certainly not limited to the castrated male.
Alone and move on to Daytona Beach, Florida.
Yes, good morning, C-SPAN and lady with the book. I was wondering, I have a question. What exactly do the extremist bombers think is going to happen to them after they commit the bombing, and what do they think is going to happen to the victims, like the women, children in the marketplace, that they blow up? I can't understand why they think this benefits them, and I was just curious, and I was wondering if you could answer that for me. Thank you.
Dalia Mogahed.
Well, I think that's a very important point, the issue of terrorism and attacking civilians. And we asked that question, in fact, to the whole world, the moral justifiability of targeting civilians for any reason by a military or by an individual, and found that across the world, whether it's a majority Muslim country, a majority non-Muslim country, people unequivocally condemned this act. In fact, people in many Muslim countries were, in some cases, more likely to condemn targeting civilians. Let's not forget that terrorism is an act that has been committed by all people throughout history, and today the greatest victims actually are, of course, Muslims of terrorism. We found that when we asked people what their greatest fear was, many people in majority Muslim countries, like Americans, talked about being afraid of being victims of terrorist acts. So I have no idea what's on the minds of people who commit these acts. What we know is what the general population has told us, and this is not an act that enjoys support in majority Muslim countries or indeed anywhere in the world.
And in fact, in Who Speaks for Islam, you say the religion of Islam and the mainstream Muslim majority have been conflated with the beliefs and actions of an extremist minority, and that this book is about the silenced majority.
Exactly. For too long, we've allowed a vocal fringe to really dominate this conversation. Everyone else has been really drowned out by this vocal minority, and this book is trying to give this silenced majority a voice.
Lake County, Florida, you're on with Dalia Mogahed, who is Executive Director of the Muslim Study Center at Gallup.
Hi, good morning. You mentioned earlier the Palestinian-Israeli situation. In 2005, Israel pulled out of Gaza, and now daily Israel is subjected to rocket fire from that region. As far as the Palestinian goes, why should Israel give up any more land when they don't really want a country. They want the destruction of Israel. Thank you.
And if I could, Ms. Mogahed, follow that up with Emmett Tyrrell's column this morning in the Washington Times. It's a Palestinian poll, and it says that the yeshiva bombing that happened a couple weeks ago, it says here that the Palestinian Center for Policy and Survey Research, an independent polling organization based in the West Bank, 84% of Palestinians approved of the attack, 64% approve of Hamas randomly firing rockets and mortars from Gaza into Israeli communities, and 75% favor ending negotiations between the leaders.
Yes, absolutely. I think these numbers underscore the degree to which this conflict has damaged the populations on both sides. We also found that a majority of Israelis think it's sometimes justified to deliberately target civilians by the military. What this really has to help us all understand is that we have to, as a global community, find a way to end this conflict, because it has been so damaging, both psychologically and physically, to both sides.
Here in America, we're polled about everything. Did you find that this was rather unique to be polled in the Muslim countries, or did they get polled a lot also?
It was very unique, and it's funny you say that we get polled about everything, and that's why it's so hard to get people to answer the phone when polling companies call. We have a response rate, and we actually do the best because of our name, of maybe 50%. In majority Muslim countries, it's more like 95%. The hardest thing in many of these countries is to get people to let you leave. They're so anxious and so excited to share their opinion.
And you did a lot of face-to-face polling, correct?
Yes, all our polling actually in the developing world is face-to-face, in home, so we don't exclude anyone who doesn't have a phone. We don't exclude anyone who may not know how to read and write. So they're all verbal interviews and in person.
And how long would you sit with somebody?
At least an hour, and that was how long it was supposed to take, and many times it would take much longer, because a closed-ended question would end up being an open-ended question. They say, well, this is what I think and here's why, and then they'd invite you to dinner. So it was really an experience just within creating the poll of empowerment in many ways, giving people a voice.
You did this from 2001 to 2007. Did you see any trend lines with the passage of time?
Well, one thing that unfortunately has changed is the standing of the United States. In many countries, it has gone down. For example, Turkey. In 2001, the majority had a favorable view of the United States, and that plummeted to something like 6% in 2007. So that has really gone south, unfortunately. Now, what hasn't changed are things like people's support for democratic values. That still stands strong, and there's still a belief that this is a key to progress.
Muskogee, Oklahoma, you're on the air.
Hello, how you all doing?
Good.
Assalamu alaikum, sister. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam, caller.
I know you mentioned a while ago about how China, you had some conversation or met with China, and here in Muskogee we had back in '06, we had Russia came over, Muslims from Russia came over and did a documentary on Muslims, Americans converting to Islam. And where I live at is a town where the young sister at the high school, they kicked her out of school because she had on her burqa. Okay, you may have heard about that. But anyway, back in '06, they came over and did a documentary on it. Turned out pretty well. But I wanted to commend you on your book. That being a Democrat, being in a democratic society, this is what allows you to do what you do. And I just have to commend you for what you're doing, because there's two reasons. One, you're a woman, and another, you're Muslim.
Dalia Mogahed.
Well, democratic values are things that we value greatly in this country, and found that that's really common ground with many people around the world, whether they live in a democratic society themselves or they don't.
And in fact, you have a chapter here also on women in the Muslim world,
Yes.
in Islam. And what did you find? What are some of the general results that you found?
We found some very interesting trends. First, that Muslim women, like women around the world, think they should have equal rights. They believe that this is what they ought to have, what they deserve. In some cases they do have those rights in their countries, and in some cases they don't. But around the world they believe equal rights to vote, to get an education, to work, and even to serve in senior levels of government. At the same time, they believe that their faith should play a large and important role in their lives. They see it as the key to progress and crucial to their well-being. So they see no contradiction between their rights and their religion.
But then there's a study in Saudi Arabia. 69% of women think that they should be allowed to drive there.
Yes.
But they're still not.
Exactly. And in fact, this last year we found that even the majority of men believe that women should be driving in Saudi Arabia. So there is this gap between what people on the ground want and what is actually happening in reality.
And you asked the question in here, do Muslim women want to be liberated by the West? And you use Afghanistan as an example. Could you explain this?
Well, I think that sometimes there's an assumption that Muslim women around the world want to, if they had the chance, adopt Western culture wholesale. And we found that really it's much more complex. Muslim women, like Muslim men, admire many things about the West, including gender equality, but at the same time do not want wholesale transplant of Western culture. They want to create rights for themselves within their own cultural and religious context.
Next call for Dalia Mogahed comes from Lexington, Massachusetts. Lexington, please go ahead.
Yes, can you hear me now?
Go ahead with your comments, sir.
Yes. Well, I have a general question. I would like to ask her just a quick summary of the book, and how also how can the result of the research can be made available to the majority of Americans first, and also to the rest of the world, because I think that's quite valuable. Is this something that I'm willing to actually contribute something to the purpose of the result of this research to be distributed freely, so that it's easily accessible by people, so they don't have to pay for it effectively?
Well, the results of our study are in our book, Who Speaks for Islam? What a Billion Muslims Really Think. You can also get many things for free on our website at gallup.com or gallupmuslimstudies.com. I'm a part of an initiative actually to disseminate the information. It's called the Muslim West Facts Initiative, where we're trying to educate people both in the Muslim world and in the West about the views of real people on the ground, so that the voice of people, ordinary people, are what we hear rather than a vocal fringe. Now, what I think is so interesting, Peter, is that what distinguishes America from many other countries is the ability to let go of old ideas, and indeed an eagerness to capture new ideas and run with them. And I think that this is what this book really allows us to do, is engage the world based on facts and not fear.
Do you find that there's a worldwide, there's a willingness to let go of old ideas?
Not always. I think that that's actually the reason that, you know, about a decade ago, all economists around the world were saying that America was going to be overtaken economically by Japan and Germany. And we proved them completely wrong. The reason we did is because our culture has this capacity to embrace new things, new people, differences, diversity, and that's really what makes us strong. And I think that this book will be devoured by the American people because they're eager for new ideas and a fact-based analysis of the world.
Who is John Esposito? His picture here on the back cover of your book.
John Esposito is one of the world's greatest scholars on Islam and Muslims. He's been in the field for almost 40 years, has written more than 30 books on the topic, and really is a renowned scholar in this topic.
How did you get a postgraduate degree in chemical engineering and then go to work for Procter & Gamble?
Well, it's an interesting route that I took, but I'm really a scientist at heart in every way, and I base what I do on hard numbers and always had. And my background in chemical engineering is really helping me with the study I have here, because as a scientist, we have to go into studies dispassionately and really look at the numbers and have the numbers and the evidence drive instead of opinion.
Why is it that you came to the U.S. from Cairo?
Well, my parents actually, I was very young, came with them, and they were both graduate students, both have a doctorate in engineering as well.
And are they here in the States? They go back to
Yes,
Egypt?
Yes, they're in Madison, Wisconsin.
Next call for Dalia Mogahed comes from Washington, D.C., Republican line.
Good morning.
Hi.
Thank you for taking my call. I must say I'm very skeptical. Her words that she used, where she said that a larger percentage of Muslims than anyone else didn't like suicide bombings and the such. Now, those are my words. But if that is such the case, action speaks so much louder than words. Why don't we see people standing up and, forget about the war part, but stand up against, all the evils? And I don't see that anywhere. I think this is all just a propaganda book.
Dalia Mogahed.
Well, I think we have to take a step back and examine the facts. Our study is the gold standard of the industry in terms of our methodology, and we did ask people around the world what they thought of attacks on civilians, and found that indeed the vast majority of people around the world, whether they were Muslim or not, condemned attacks on civilians, and we can very confidently say that that's the case. Now, the other part of the question is, why don't we have some people standing up against the evils? Why don't Muslims or others speak out? And I think we have to really look at terrorism as for what it is, and it is a crime against humanity. And as such, all people have a responsibility to stand up against it. All people are victims of terrorism, and all people have in some way had members of their group commit terrorism. And as a crime against humanity, everyone should be speaking out against it. And Muslims are actually some of the loudest people in terms of speaking out against terrorism. Unfortunately, we just don't hear about it in the media, but there are public condemnations of terrorism all over the internet and are very easy to access.
46% of Americans say that the Bible should be a source, and 9% believe it should be the only source of legislation. Perhaps even more surprising, 42% of Americans want religious leaders to have a direct role in writing a constitution, while 55% want them to play no role at all. These numbers are almost identical to those in Iran. Suttons Bay, Michigan, Democrat, you're on the air.
Yes. Thank you for taking my call. I also have a degree in engineering. I'm 76, and luckily I can still count, and I know my alphabet. I do have a very shallow historic understanding of that area of the world, the Mideast, going back over 2,000 years. And some 20 years or so ago, Pope John Paul suggested an international city for Jerusalem, which is the nexus of the turmoil that has existed for millennia. I'd like to hear what I concluded the same thing before he made his announcement, that there would never be, or should never be, an ownership situation when three religions have occupied and lived for well over 2,000 years together. So what is your opinion of that concept? I know the Jews are vehemently opposed to that, but I'd like to hear your opinions from a Muslim standpoint. Thank you very much.
Ms. Mogahed.
Jerusalem is, of course, a city important to all three faiths, and I guess I would really go back to what do people around the world believe, rather than, you know, me as an individual. And I believe that when we ask people, especially in the Middle East, this issue is extremely important, very close to their heart, and a resolution really has to be a top priority.
This article was in the New York Times this morning. I don't know if you had a chance to see it. At Harvard, students' Muslim traditions are a topic of debate. Two issues of Muslim practice, whether the call to prayer should ring out across Harvard Yard and whether the university should grant women separate gym hours, have unleashed small waves of controversy over how Harvard practices tolerance. Is this the difference in the cultures? How does this play out on an international level? I mean, these are some fundamental differences.
Right, and I think what's interesting is that these differences kind of cut through religions and actually separate people who are more religious from people who are less religious. And the more religious side includes evangelical Christians, it includes Orthodox Jews, and includes conservative Muslims. And on the other side are Jews, Muslims, and Christians who are simply less religious or conservative. And so we have to really look at it more from a global point of view. These practices of wanting privacy and certain religious practices are things that really cut across, and we can find them in all three faiths.
But do you understand that, you know, to have the Muslim call for prayer ring out across Harvard Yard, can you imagine what some outcry may be?
Absolutely, and it's something that really has to be negotiated case by case. I don't know what, you know, the majority of people in Harvard believe, or even what the majority of Muslims want. They might compare it to a church bell, for example, that rings out and everyone hears it. And I think it's just something that people have to engage and really have honest dialogue around.
Next call for Dalia Mogahed comes from Lincoln, Nebraska.
Yes, good morning. I don't know if you did in the study ask about, you know, in the Muslim world, what did the majority of the Muslims think about the Christians and Jesus, since the Christianity started in the Middle East and, you know, people lived thousands of years, Christians, Muslims, and Jews together.
Okay. Well, we didn't ask specifically about religious groups. What we did ask about were opinions of different countries, and what we found was that many predominantly Christian countries actually enjoyed very positive views among Muslims, countries in Europe, for example, and that views of other countries and other people fell along policy and not cultural or religious lines. So, for example, France and Germany enjoy much more positive views than the United States and the UK.
Angie from Wilton, New Hampshire emails in, I wonder if you have found that the Islamic people of the world think that there is a modern-day crusade against them perpetrated by the West, and if they do, why?
Well, we do find in many polls that there is this belief that the war on terror is a war on Islam. And why do they believe that? Well, there could be many reasons, but people do have this feeling that the West does not regard them as equal, that the West does not respect them as equal and thinks of them as inferior, and therefore is hostile to them and their faith.
Another email from Andrew in San Diego. Interesting book. In '03, I spent a great deal of time in Dubai. I noticed there are souk vendors who had Osama bin Laden dolls, Twin Tower statues depicting flame and smoke coming from the building, etc. Can you please discuss this aspect of the Muslim world in context of your book?
Well, I certainly can't talk for these specific souks. What we found when we asked people around the world what they thought of the attacks of 9/11, that the majority condemned it. They thought it was morally unjustified. 7%, however, did believe that 9/11 was completely justified and had unfavorable views of the United States. We talk about these people in our book, What Makes a Radical, and found that what motivates this 7% is politics, not piety.
Next call comes from Annandale, Virginia, right here in the suburbs.
Hello.
Hi.
Well, I have a comment and a question, please. First of all, I'm from Lebanon, and my comment is that I would like the American people to be able to differentiate between an Arab and a Muslim. Unfortunately, in the Arab world, you are born with a certain faith or background just because your great-great-grandfather practiced it. It's not necessary, however, that you believe in this faith. However, sometimes you cannot abandon your whole traditions, you know. Like, take me, for example. I'm a secular person. I don't believe in Islam or Christianity or anything, or in any religion for all that matters. But I have a big respect for the morals and the ethics of these religions if people live according to their religion. That's one. Number two, for those people who say that we, as Arabs, want the destruction of Israel, well, I would like them to know that I am from South Lebanon, and I am a Shia myself, supposedly. And my house was destroyed twice by Israelis, yet I want peace with Israel, and I want to live peacefully with my neighbors because that will make my country and their country prosperous. However, how can you live in peace with somebody who is hitting you on your head constantly?
Well, the caller does make a very important point, the distinction between being an Arab and being a Muslim. Of course, not all Arabs are Muslim. Many Arabs are Christians or even Jewish Arabs. And indeed, not all Muslims are Arab. Only about 20%, or even some estimates say 15% of Muslims globally are Arab. And the majority of Muslims actually live in Asia.
This is a couple more email questions we've gotten. Bill Weibel of Johnstown, PA. In conducting your survey, were your questions screened by any government authorities before the survey was conducted?
They were screened by government authorities in many countries, not all, and in some cases questions were cut by the authorities. And
can you give an example of a question that was cut?
Sure, absolutely. A question that was cut in one of the countries we went in, which I won't mention, is should people have the right to assemble freely in this constitution that we were asking people about. And in a country, in fact, where people are not allowed to assemble freely, that question was cut.
So how do you factor that into the poll?
Well, what we do is we allow people a lot of different opportunities to answer basically the same question. So we give them not only closed-ended questions where we're asking about specific things, but open-ended questions like, what would you change about the Muslim world if you had the chance? Or what can the Muslim world do to improve its own situation? And with those open-ended questions, we are able to get at some of these underlying issues.
Second half of his question, do you personally feel in any way threatened by anyone for the research you have conducted?
No, absolutely not.
Now, how many people did you have out in the field doing this, and who were they?
Well, we have research directors for each region of the world, and they are Gallup professionals. They're really top of their field in terms of methodology and research. And then they would conduct, find local firms that would actually take the questionnaire and execute the study in the field. So we have Gallup research directors, and then within each country we subcontract the research.
And I guess I was kind of presuming that you did some traveling during this survey. Did you travel to a lot of the countries yourself?
I've traveled all around the world and spoken to audiences all around the world, especially about this research.
Lois in Atlanta. Could you please elaborate on how Muslims could set up and embrace a government that incorporates both religious freedom and Sharia? I think I didn't understand your earlier answer.
Well, it's interesting because I think you quoted that quotation, and we didn't really get to discuss it, about the United States and how the majority of Americans, 57%, think that the Bible should be a source of legislation, at the same time support democratic values. So the concept isn't really as foreign as it may seem. We are not, as a country, similar to France, where there's this prescriptive secularism. Our version of a secular state is more of a religious pluralism. And what I think people in majority Muslim countries are thinking about, and of course there's variety and diversity, is a government who reflects their values in legislation and at the same time allows for freedom.
Diane from Intervale, a regular Washington Journal watcher, are you fearful about the deteriorating plight of Iraqi women, particularly in the city of Basra?
Well, I think we are all fearful for the plight of Iraqis in general, and that would include women. When we asked women around the world what their greatest fear was or what they wanted the West to do for better relations, they really focused on global issues or general issues of economics and political stagnation, rather than focusing on gender-specific issues. So their greatest priority is very similar to their male counterparts, and that is to uplift society as a whole.
Did you have any special circumstances interviewing people in Iraq?
Well, the last time we interviewed actually was in 2004, and we will hopefully be going back in. But yes, the security situation in Iraq has made it very difficult.
Annapolis, Maryland, thanks for holding. You're on with Dalia Mogahed, who is the co-author of Who Speaks for Islam. Go ahead.
Good morning.
Hi.
I wanted to ask, I've often heard that one of the biggest problems that Muslim people in their countries have with the United States, and the reason that there's so much animosity towards the Western culture, is because of the wholesale exportation of immorality, particularly sexual immorality, adultery, and homosexuality, and that the people are afraid of the level of corruption of the West will infect.
And you address that in the book.
Yes, we do. We found that indeed this was something that people criticized about the West, that they felt that there was a breakdown of traditional values, of family values in the West. What was so interesting is when we asked Americans, what do you like least about the West, we heard exactly the same thing. And there's this critique among Americans of the breakdown of traditional values and moral decay. Now, is this what's driving animosity against the United States? The answer is simply no. It simply is not, because we found that people have positive views of other countries which are also perhaps even more liberal in terms of their moral values, such as France and Germany. So there is a critique, but it's not at the heart of what is driving animosity. The issues are much more political than cultural or moral.
Detroit, good morning. Detroit, good. I apologize. Go ahead, Detroit.
Okay. I'm a modern Muslim from Bosnia. I live in Detroit, obviously, now. When I was 10 years old, my dad and my aunt were killed by Orthodox Christian terrorists. And right now, my brother is in Iraq. He's an American soldier. And we still don't feel any resentment, even though my dad and my aunt were killed by the terrorists. Christian terrorists. We have no resentment towards any Christians, because I have a girlfriend here. She's a Christian. He has a girlfriend. My brother has a girlfriend. And I just want to say that the media brings it out even worse, because they trying to put the terrorists and the just Muslims that want to live in peace, they put them all in the same corner. And that's I think it's really wrong that they're trying to do that.
Thank you, caller.
I think what the caller highlights is what we heard around the world, is stop associating all Muslims with the terrorists, because Muslims around the world tell us they disagree vehemently with what the terrorists do. And we also have to keep reminding ourselves that they are the greatest victims of terrorism, and in fact have the most to gain by ending it. Like crime in parts of the world, we all disagree with organized crime, and the fact that it continues to happen does not mean that we are, quietly allowing it to happen. But crime continues to happen even though societies reject it, very similar to terrorism.
Is the book available in all bookstores?
Yes, the book Who Speaks for Islam is available in all bookstores.
Next call, Feasterville, a few minutes left. Feasterville, Pennsylvania, you're on the air. I am so sorry. I am just completely forgetting about this
Dalia?
phone. I apologize, Feasterville. Please start again.
Yes, Dalia, I wanted to ask you, earlier you were discussing the Christian who was put to death for his religion in a predominantly Muslim land, and I'm hearing an echo in here.
Okay. You got to turn down the volume on your TV, caller.
It's completely down.
Okay, just go ahead then.
Okay, in a predominantly Muslim land. And I didn't hear you speak out to deplore or to denounce the fact that that Christian was killed. And also, I'm a Roman Catholic, but I love the fact that Muslims and people of any religion live in this country. I'm wondering how you feel about atheists, and there are people of religions who maybe leave their religion for certain purposes. Say maybe a Roman Catholic person might still abide by the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, etc. There are good people who, well, we don't want to feel like we're being forced into a religion because you feel that the Muslim religion is the best and we have the best, the best teachings and so forth. I want to know that Muslims that live here or live even in the world accept all kinds of people for different things, and they're not.
Leave it there, caller. Thanks.
Well, I think the caller is bringing up several important points. First of all, Muslims around the world, again, like I said, have told us that that freedom of religion is a value that they find important and admire, in fact, in the West. The issue around this specific the Afghan the Afghani who was had a death sentence because he converted. This is in fact a very controversial issue within Islamic jurisprudence. There is a great deal of disagreement about this edict, and there's debate happening right now among Muslim scholars as to how correct this is, even from a very traditional Orthodox point of view. Now, condemning it, of course, I think we can all agree that this is wrong. I think it's important to take a step back and in many ways assume that, like all people, Muslims are just as likely to disagree with the things that we all find deplorable, and assume this rather than to assume the otherwise.
How many Muslims in the U.S. do you know?
Well, there are different estimates. They go from 2 million to 8 million, and we're actually going to be doing a major study of Muslim Americans later this year, and hope to be back and talk to you more about it.
How many Muslims in the world?
1.3 billion is the number that we most often hear.
Time for 2 more phone calls for our guest. Atlanta, you're on the air.
Good morning. I just wanted to first congratulate your guest and her fellow researchers on all of their efforts and completing their book. That was a great deal of work.
Thank you.
But I also wanted to get her opinion on something. Clearly in this country we've had our radical religious people, such as the KKK and their cross burning and their grand wizards who were actually preachers. Mm-hmm. And it took our system of government and our Protestant people to go and pull them out of their holes and put them in jail. But I wanted to ask you about what about the autocracy of the Islamic faith? And
did you say autocracy or hypocrisy?
Autocracy. It's so autocratic. can the people in the Islamic faith stand up and stop, the Wahhabi sect and these types of groups?
Well, I think the question is the autocracy of the Islamic faith, and I think it touches on this debate: is Islam and are Muslims able to accept democratic values? Is Islam compatible with democracy? And we found in our research over and over that the people who interpret that faith and live it every day, saw no contradiction between democratic values and their faith. And so what's really important isn't how we might read a text and interpret it, but people who live that text and who care what that text is telling them interpret their own faith. And what we found is that people do interpret Islam to be compatible with democracy in many ways.
Last call for Dalia Mogahed comes from Potomac, Maryland.
Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum, Dalia. Peace be upon you, Peter. My question is, Dalia, did you poll my fellow Americans about the killing of civilians in Afghanistan and Israel and Palestine and Iraq by the U.S. Army and the Israeli Army? And how did they view that? Did they see it as a form of terrorism or not? Thank you.
We asked Americans a general question, just as we asked people around the world, about the moral justifiability of killing civilians in general, and found that 6% of Americans said that targeting civilians was completely justified. Only 6%, which is of course statistically identical to 7% who said in the Muslim world that 9/11 was completely justified and had unfavorable views of the United States. That 6% compares to 4% in Saudi Arabia and 1.2% in Iran. And so this idea of targeting civilians is an issue that the whole world essentially agrees is completely wrong.
Dalia Mogahed is the co-author of this book, Who Speaks for Islam? What a Billion Muslims Really Think. It's a Gallup organization book and study. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter.
About an hour to go left in the Washington Journal. We'll be right back. More news articles and your phone calls.
Coming up this weekend on Book TV, Saturday beginning at 10 a.m.